you saw the maps displayed, and you saw with what loving care Shoghi Effendi drew these lines, decided on the colors, and how he connected the countries to these 12 generals. The 12 generals were that he had the national spiritual assemblies that he had already formed. He added Canada, he added South America, he added Central America, and he added the Italo-Swiss. So there were 8 plus 4, they became 12. And he called them the generals of the army of light. And he wrote to each one of them a special message outlining their duties under the 10-year crusade. And then he had already called on the Baha'i world to have these intercontinental conferences. And these intercontinental conferences, there were 4 of them, and at these conferences he re-divided, if you like, the goals according to these conferences. So when he's writing, let us say, to the Western Hemisphere, he gave them the goals for the Western Hemisphere. When he was addressing the European continent or the European conference, he only gave them the goals for the European conference, and so on and so forth. So he had already 2 sections. One was the 12 generals. Then another way of dividing the goals was according to continent. And then he also looked at the whole world as one unit, and he had a major message to the Baha'i world that he had to choose one of these continents and let them have 2 messages, one for the continent and one for the world. And he chose Wilmette. He chose the cradle of the administrative order. And he wrote a major message for the whole world, which applies to all continents. Having done all this, he also, as I have put in the notes, he sent this document here that you saw displayed also with the maps. He also issued this. Now, what is this? He sent 1 copy to the British Isles and 1 copy to the United States. The one that I have in my hand is the copy that was published in the British Isles. They are exactly the same. And this, it's called the Baha'i Faith 1844-1952. Then, after showing the statistical part, information statistical and comparative, then he says, including supplement. 10-year International Baha'i Teaching and Consolidation Plan, 1953-1963, compiled by Shoghi Effendi, guardian of the Baha'i Faith. He sent this to, as I told you, to these 2 national assemblies and asked them to publish it. Now, when you look at this booklet, you see it is in 2 parts. The first part is purely information up to 1953. All this section, which comprises 47 pages, has all the information about the Baha'i world statistically up to 1952, the beginning of 1953. Now, this section, which is here, the first part, the Baha'is were familiar with this type of work by Shoghi Effendi, because he started issuing statistical booklets of this type in 1944. The first edition, if you like, of the statistics in the Baha'i world came out in 1944. It was a very small booklet, about half the size of this page, and it had very little information about the Baha'i world, because the Baha'i world at that time was not the Baha'i world that was in 1952, at the end of 1952. So that was the first one. Then, between 1944 and 1953, he issued 2 more of these booklets. Every time a little bit thicker, as the Baha'i world was growing. And then he produced these 47 pages, which gives you an idea of how the Baha'i world was at the time of the beginning of the 10-year crusade. And then the second part is the 10-year crusade and the goals and objectives of the plan. He, as you know from the notes, he had 27 objectives for the 10-year plan. And according to what he did here was, he first took these goals and enumerated them as you have them enumerated in the notes, 27, under 27 headings. Then after that, he followed that with a whole page of the territories mentioned by Abdul Baha in his Tablets of the Divine Plan. It is the same list that you find in your own notes. Then he showed how many of these 27 objectives, and there are 10 of them, were goals that had to be achieved through the activities and the initiative of the World Center itself. In other words, himself, and then later on, of course, the Hands of the Cause, who continued his work until 1953. So whatever had to be done at the World Center, 10 of these 27, he pulled out and classified them as World Center goals. And then the rest, then he divided in different ways. For example, according to continents, he divided the goals according to continents. According to national spiritual assemblies, he divided all the goals according to the 12 generals. Then, which countries were to form national assemblies? A whole list. Which countries had to acquire temple sites? Another list. Which countries in the world were to acquire national endowments? Another list. And so on, according to goals. So he listed and relisted and rearranged the goals. For example, alphabetical list of the territories to be opened. See? Now, these he divided the world into 3 divisions. The first were the 12 generals. He called these communities, the 12, where the 12 national assemblies were formed, he called them the administrative bases for the work of the 10-year crusade. Then he had what he called consolidation territories. Consolidation territories were territories where already there were Baha'is but needed special assistance. In the title, as you see here, he says 10-year International Baha'i Teaching and Consolidation Plan. So the rest of the world he divided into 2 territory sections, consolidation and virgin. So it became 3 parts. The 12 generals, the bases, the administrative bases. Then the consolidation territories, then the virgin territories. That's how he divided the world. If you like, you can look at it today in terms of category A, B, C. Except that the House of Justice is telling us that in terms of our countries, Violet, could you use my son of me? Thank you. I don't know what to say. Yeah, the three ABC. Yeah, he had ABC. The House of Justice is telling each national assemblies under the 5-year plan, consider yourselves to be in charge of the whole world, so to speak. That is your country. Divide your country into clusters. You see, the clusters become these either virgin territories or consolidation territories. And then the National Assembly itself, sitting in its national office, becomes the administrative basis, the general for the whole country. Except that the House of Justice, instead of having 3 categories, told us make it 4 categories, because the work of the faith was developing, and therefore the country is divided into 4 different categories, A, B, C, D. So that's how it is. And blessed are those countries that can have more and more A clusters, because the idea, the whole hope of the House of Justice is to have as many national assemblies as possible, having at least the majority of their clusters to be A clusters. That is the hope of the House of Justice. So that we can really take the plunge into this great ocean. And the ocean is to spiritualize and to attract the masses to the cause of God. Because the whole purpose of the administration is teaching. As you know this already very well. Another thing that Shoghi Effendi did, because of his desire to carry out the goals as soon as possible, maybe because he knew his end was approaching very rapidly, he said, it is true, we have assigned these goals according to the generals and the different responsibilities for each National Assembly. But for example, when it came to virgin territories, if this National Assembly could not send pioneers to that country, anybody, anywhere in the world could go there. So he opened the doors for anybody to go anywhere in order to achieve the goals as rapidly as possible. In addition to that, when he saw that one National Assembly was lagging behind and was not doing what it should do, and unfortunately there were some National Assemblies, because of their internal problems, because of their financial problems, they could not do much. So he extended his arm. And when he saw that there was a strong community anywhere in the world, he would call on them, try and go there, to these virgin territories. For example, Violette will be talking to us, I hope, about Mr. Olinga and what happened to him. Now, Mr. Olinga and the Baha'is in Uganda were in Uganda. Uganda was not one of the generals. It did not have a National Assembly. It had teaching committees and it had local assemblies and so on. So what does Shoghi Effendi do? He looks at his Baha'i world and he sends a message, a cabled message, to Uganda. He says, we need pioneers in the British Cameroons, in West Africa, for French Cameroons in West Africa, in Togoland, French Togoland. We need pioneers for British Togoland. We need pioneers for Ashanti Protectorate. We need pioneers to go to Northern Territories, which was part of Ghana in those days. You, Baha'is of Uganda, arise and go to these places. Now, these territories he had already assigned to either the American or to the German or to the Indian or to different national assemblies. But because they were slow, because they did not have the right people to be sent immediately, he called on this small community in Uganda to arise and go, pioneering. Then a time came in Cameroon Republic, the same thing. As Mr. Olinga developed his work in the Cameroon Republic, he gave them goals as well. So this is what I'm trying to say. I'm trying to say that Shoghi Effendi did not tie his hands. He knew that these goals had to be achieved by a certain time. And he pushed the Baha'i world in any way he could in order to ensure total and immediate victory. Now we come to the 27 objectives of the 10-year plan. Now these 27 objectives, some of them, as I told you, were 10-year World Center goals. And as we go over them, if there is any need for explanation, I will explain those goals. But all of them do not need explanation. Some of these objectives are purely statistical in nature. For example, take number 3 on page 3. Over twofold increase in the number of languages. All right, then there is an explanation of what happened. This does not need any explanation by me here. Take the next one, doubling the number of martial Ascars. Now this may need some explanation. I'll have to explain that a little bit maybe. Acquisition of a site for the future martial Ascar on Mount Carmel. That also needs to be explained. So all of the goals need not be explained. Some are statistical. Increase the number of territories to be opened. We give statistics. And the languages and the number of temple sites to be acquired, the number of incorporations, national assemblies to be incorporated, national assemblies to have their national constitutions drawn up. So anything that you see I don't comment on, it means that from my point of view the notes are adequate. They don't need. But there are a number of points here. I have selected a number of them, and as we go along I will explain. I'll give you further explanation. For example, we start with number 1 on page 2. Adoption of preliminary measures for the construction of Baha'u'llah's sepulchre in the Holy Land. I have given you some explanation, but I just wanted to explain to you that when this goal was first announced, the Baha'is of the world thought that this meant that he was going to draw up plans for the construction of the shrine of Baha'u'llah. That's what the Baha'is understood this to mean. In other words, he had now built the shrine of the Bab. Now he wants to construct another beautiful building for the shrine of Baha'u'llah. And what he says about preliminary measures, that is what he had in mind. But Shoghi Effendi gradually explained that this was not his intention. His intention was to cleanse, to purify the surroundings of the shrine of Baha'u'llah from the presence of the covenant breakers and the buildings that they were occupying. That's what he wanted. So that's what he did. He also had just acquired some property outside, above, beyond the shrine itself and the little property surrounding it. He had more property now. He wanted to develop this property into gardens. What you see today is things that he started doing even before the 10-year crusade began. But he developed it further to the end of his life. The shrine of Baha'u'llah was a little jewel with a little bit of garden around it. That was all. And gradually he expanded this property and made it into a garden. He called it the Haram-e-Aqdas. And then the House of Justice developed further parts of this land. And now you see that the shrine is in the center, surrounded by a big wheel of gardens. And when it is time for major celebrations in Bahji, we walk all around the outer circumference of this wheel as an act of circumambulation. But on other days, when we don't have major celebrations or commemorations associated with the life of Baha'u'llah, like every year we have Rizwan period, we have the ascension of Baha'u'llah every year. So we do circumambulate, but on a smaller circle instead of going the outer wheel, the big wheel. So these things developed gradually. Shoghi Effendi was successful in getting these covenant breakers outside this property entirely. I'm sure a book will be written one day about the steps that he took in order to cleanse, as he used to say, this property from the presence of these covenant breakers. Dr. Jakari, in his book, has made some reference to it. Amatul Bahar Ruhi Khanum, of course, in The Priceless Pearl, has also devoted a whole chapter, maybe more than one chapter, to this whole question. But that's how what you see today is what we have inherited from the Guardian's efforts for the beautification of the shrine of Baha'u'llah. The next goal, doubling the number of countries within the pale of the faith, does not need any explanation. The next one, doubling the number of Mash'ul Ascars through the institution of the construction in Asia and in Europe, needs some explanation. The explanation is this, that the one in Asia was to be for Tehran. And this was not possible because the conditions in the country were such that they would not give us a building permit to build the Mash'ul Ascar in Tehran. So Shoghi Effendi decided that instead of this one Mash'ul Ascar in Tehran, we should have two Mash'ul Ascar. One in Kampala, Uganda, and one in Sydney, Australia. And these two Mash'ul Ascars were built in order to replace the one in the cradle of our faith in Iran. Number 5 is acquisition of a site for the future Mash'ul Ascar on Mount Carmel. Now, when Baha'u'llah felt that he was free towards the end of his life to leave the Akka area, the Akka, Bahji, Mazra'e area, and go to Haifa, for example, he availed himself of this opportunity to go to Haifa. And on one of these trips, he went to the mountain, Mount Carmel. And as you know, he himself stood, as I told you yesterday, and decided where the shrine of the Bab should be. He also went to the top of the mountain, and those of you who have been to Haifa as pilgrims or as 3-day visitors, you may have gone to the temple site on Mount Carmel. It's at the very top of the mountain. It is on a level, it is on a higher level than the shrine, but it's at the western end of the mountain. So Baha'u'llah had gone there, and he pitched his tent there, and it was there that he revealed the tablet of Carmel, about which we spoke yesterday. And as he revealed this tablet, Shoghi Effendi used to explain this to the pilgrims. He paced back and fro on the place where his tent was, and with a very loud voice he chanted this tablet, revealed it. And at the end of it, he clearly says that he has revealed in this tablet certain things which were concealed in his knowledge. So there are certain allusions, as I told you yesterday, in this tablet, which had to remain concealed until the time of Shoghi Effendi, when he lifted the veil from these words that had been revealed by him, and showing us that this is going to be both a spiritual center with the erection of the shrine of the Bab, as well as the administrative center. The next item is the erection of the first dependency of the Mashghal Ascar in Wilmette. I think this is only too clear there that a home for the aged was established. It doesn't need any further explanation. Likewise, the following one about the few temple sites and the acquisition of property, that also does not need any explanation. The development, number 8, development of the function of the institution of the hands of the cause of God. Now, this is a very important thing, because the enemies of the faith have attacked us on this basis that the hands of the cause were not supposed to have any authority. How is it then that after the passing of Shoghi Effendi, they assumed authority? And they became literally, if you like, or nominally as well as actively, the head of the faith, because there was no house of justice, and Shoghi Effendi had passed away, and here we have hands of the cause who are not supposed to have administrative authority taking over the reins of the administration of the cause. Now, it's very important for us to know how to defend the cause when it comes to this question. Here he says, development of the functions of the institution of the hands of the cause of God. In other words, he, in 1953, at the beginning of the 10-year crusade, he envisaged that there's going to be a new development of these functions that they had. What do we see here? We see that in his last major message to the Baha'i world, he gives them a new title. The title he gives them is Chief Stewards of Baha'u'llah's Embryonic World Commonwealth. When Shoghi Effendi uses the term embryonic world commonwealth or embryonic world order, any of these two, either of these two titles, he means, because he has added the word embryonic, he means the administrative order. That's what he means. So the chief stewards of Baha'u'llah's embryonic world commonwealth, he is referring to the administrative order. So he says, you, from the hands of the cause, have the destiny of being chief stewards. Now, chief stewards is far more than being an advisory body to the national assemblies. Chief steward is those people who are in charge of something for a temporary period, so that then later they hand over the responsibility to another responsible body. So he gave them this title. Another thing which was even more important than the term chief stewards is he says that in that same message, he says they are charged now with the specific duty of watching over the security of the faith, thereby complementing the function of the original board, whose duty will henceforth be exclusively concerned with the assisting of the 10-year crusade, of the 10-year plan. So they were in full charge of the protection of the cause. They had to guard this body. In yet another message, which was written just before this message here, which is quoted, he says in that message, in June 1957, in that message he says that the hands of the cause and the National Spiritual Assemblies are destined to work together, consult together, and through consultation they will be responsible for the health of the entire Baha'i community and the healthy operation of these institutions. They will be responsible also for the fulfillment of the destiny of the cause. It is in their hands. The wording of this message of June 1957 is so emphatic, so dramatic, that frankly, those of us who read that message at that time in 1957 felt that something was going to happen. It is as if Shoghi Effendi was saying goodbye, as if he was saying, now the time has come. You two institutions work together. You don't really need me anymore. This is the impression you got. And elsewhere in these notes, at the end, towards the end of these, I have put these things together, and you'll see how they fit in. So we will leave this for the moment. Number 9, establishment of a Baha'i court in the Holy Land as a preliminary to the emergence of the Universal House of Justice. This is another area which needs very careful discussion by us. Because Shoghi Effendi, when he established the International Baha'i Council, he said that this International Baha'i Council will develop into a Baha'i court. And this Baha'i court will then develop into an elected council, because it had originally an appointed council. It will develop into an elected council, and then the elected council will become the Universal House of Justice later. So you had these stages enumerated by him. Then, when he was giving us the 10-year plan, we saw that he had included this question of the court also in his 10-year plan. And so many questions were put to Shoghi Effendi as to what his intention was. Just as the very first goal was not very clear about the construction of the Shrine of Baha'u'llah, many friends started asking him what he meant by this quote. And he went on explaining. And I tried to put here for you a section what really was meant according to his own writings. What was the purpose of the court? Now, the attack that they are leveling against the Baha'i community, the enemies of our faith, at this time, at this very time, is that the hands of the cause skipped this stage of establishment of a court. In other words, we had an appointed council, then we had an elected council, then we had the Universal House of Justice. This intermediate stage of the court did not happen. Therefore, how can we say that this is a fulfillment of the vision of Shoghi Effendi? This is how they are attacking us. We have to know how to defend the cause on this score. When you read the writings of Shoghi Effendi himself, and what the explanations that he gave to the members of the International Council, to the hands of the cause in the Holy Land. It became clear that this court that he has mentioned was not to be an international court. It was to be a court empowered to execute laws related to personal status. What does this mean? Matters of personal status are marriage, divorce, inheritance, burial. These are matters of personal status. In the East, these matters regarding inheritance, marriage, divorce, and so on, are matters that are referred to religious courts as distinct from secular courts or civil courts. Now, those of you who are living in Europe, you don't know that such a thing exists. But in the East, it does exist. There are religious courts. These religious courts deal with these matters, these specific matters related to marriage, divorce, etc. And they are given authority to carry these things out. When you read Shoghi Effendi giving the stages for the development of the faith in every country, you see that one of the stages, which is stage number 4, which is the stage of recognition, his definition of the stage of recognition is that the Baha'i faith should have equal rights with other sister religious communities. What does this mean? It means that in a given country, if the Christian communities have certain rights, if the Muslim communities have certain rights, if the Jewish communities have certain rights, the Baha'is should also have equal rights. This is what it means. In matters of personal status, if they have religious courts, we must have religious courts. Because there should be equality of rights and privileges. This is what it means. All right. So, in what happened in Palestine? In Palestine, we had religious courts during the time of the Ottoman rule. Because you know, before the First World War, the Holy Land was in the hands of the Ottoman government. It was part of the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire had all these religious courts, and they had religious courts in Palestine. When the British took over after the First World War, they did not change the condition because they knew they're going to be there only for 30 years. Palestine did not become a colony of the British government. It became a mandate of the British government, given to the British under the decision of the League of Nations. So they knew they were going to be there only for 30 years. So they did not change all these laws that existed at the time of the Ottoman Empire. They preserved the religious courts. All right. 1948 comes. The mandate is ended. The British go. There is a little war going on. Israel wins the war fighting with the Arabs. The Holy Land, part of it, where there is Haifa, Acre, where the Baha'i community, the Baha'i World Center is, becomes part of Israel. The other parts becomes part of Jordan. But this part which had Haifa and Acre and Mount Carmel and all this, all fell in the hands of Israel. What does Israel do? This is 1948 now. What does Israel do? Does it abolish religious codes? No. They preserved the religious codes. So whatever existed in the Ottoman period was continued during the British Mandate and was further continued during the Israeli state, when the Israel state was established. Under those conditions, Shoghi Effendi saw how could the Baha'i community have less rights than other religious courts, than other religious communities. If they had courts, we had to have courts. Now, he didn't have any administration. We didn't have local assemblies. We didn't have a national assembly. We had nothing. We only had this international council that he has created. So he said, all right, this international council will be vested with this authority. In other words, if there was going to be a local marriage, it would be the International Baha'i Council, which will have the right to sign the document for the marriage certificate. This is how he set it up. As Shoghi Effendi was watching from 1948 till 1957, what the Israeli government was doing, he saw that the Israeli government was reducing, trying even to eliminate these religious codes. And they wanted to make them civil codes. So the rights and privileges of these courts were being reduced on a progressive way. He saw this. So he told the members of the International Council that it's quite possible, because of this secular trend in Israel, that this goal will not be achieved, the goal of establishing a Baha'i court. The way that the Israeli government is trying to reduce the influence of these religious courts, one of the ways is this, that if a decision is taken by a religious court, then it is possible for a citizen of Israel, let us say, or a resident in Israel, to appeal to a higher court, which is the Supreme Court, and it is not religious, it is Supreme Court, to break the decision of that religious court. So the religious court becomes under the decision of a civil court in Israel, which is the international court of the country. Just imagine for a religious court being the International Baha'i Council, let us say, to take a decision about a divorce case, and then the decision is broken by a higher court of the country. It was impossible, it was inconceivable for Shoghi Effendi to have accepted such a situation. And they would not give us any rights over and above the others. We had to be, if they were reduced, we had to be reduced as well. And possibly, if we were to apply for the establishment of a religious code, because of the whole trend in the country, probably they would not find it easy. They would probably be unwilling even to establish a new court for a new religion. So there are so many aspects. The International Council made a thorough study of this whole thing with international lawyers. And you will find a report of the International Council published in volume 13 of the Baha'i World, which summarizes for you all these complicated issues that arose in the Holy Land when this matter was closely studied, fully studied, by the hands of the cause of God as well as the International Council. And if you read that report, you'll see how clear it is. The next goal, 5 more minutes. The next goal is codification of the laws and ordinances of the Kitab-e-Aqdas, the mother book of the Baha'i revelation. When Shoghi Effendi was asked, when will the Kitab-e-Aqdas be translated? he said the first thing to be done before the translation of the Kitab al-Aqdas was to codify the laws in a manner to show the relationship of these goals to each other in the form of a code. And he started working on it himself. He did it first in Persian, because all these notes were given to the House of Justice, of course. And from the room of Shoghi Effendi, one of the first things that Ruhi Khanum did was to take these notes of Shoghi Effendi about the codification, which he had all put in one bundle himself. She took the bundle and immediately transferred it to the House of Justice. This is the first thing that Ruhi Khanum did, transferring papers from the room of Shoghi Effendi to the House of Justice. It was this bundle, so that the House of Justice could continue working on this codification. He had started working in Persian, then from the Persian he translated it into English. And finally this work was completed, and you have seen the little booklet which shows synopsis and codification of the laws of the Kitab al-Aqdas, with an introduction written by the House of Justice. This thing was something which was like a preamble, an introduction to the translation of the Kitab al-Aqdas into English. And as you know, this thing came much later. But this was the beginning. The next item is very easy to explain: establishment of 6 national Baha'i courts in the chief cities of the Islamic East. And then you've got Tehran, Cairo, Baghdad, New Delhi, Karachi, Kabul. All of them are in Muslim countries. And it is exactly the same thing. In other words, since in these countries there are religious courts, therefore we must have religious courts as well. Just as I told you in the case of Israel. But none of these countries were prepared to allow the Baha'is to have a religious court. So this goal remains pending. You'll see that this is one of the first goals that remain pending like this. There will be others as we go along, but at the beginning of the 10-year, before the announcement of the 10-year crusade, Shoghi Effendi called on the Baha'i world. He said, I'm going to announce these goals, but I am adjuring you, I want you to take a formal vow that you will, however long it will take, however difficult it's going to be, that you will persevere as a Baha'i world, even generation after generation, until all the goals of this 10-year plan will be accomplished. The House of Justice considers such goals as are still pending binding upon it, and they will want to carry out these goals. They will be carried out. They were not carried out during the 10-year plan because of conditions, unfavorable conditions, but they are certainly on the agenda of the Universal House of Justice for future implementation. It's enough for this moment. We left off with the establishment of Baha'i courts in the chief cities of the Islamic East. And I told you that the House of Justice considers itself committed to, for example, a goal like this, which continues to remain pending, continues to remain unaccomplished. And there are a number of such goals that we are going to come across in the 10-year crusade goals, which were not possible to accomplish. But then if the situation in these countries like Iran and Egypt and Iraq, etc., that they change and they become secular, then the whole situation also changes. Because if a country becomes completely secular, it may very well abolish all religious courts, and all religious courts will simply become civil courts. So in such a case, in such a situation, this goal will not be possible to accomplish at all. So, but in the situation as it used to be in 1953, because he wanted to ensure that the Baha'i community has equal rights as other religious communities, he included them here. But if the situation changes, naturally, many of this particular goal will not be possible to accomplish. And as you know, in Shoghi Effendi, in God Passes By, if you read the end of chapter 2 of God Passes By, the last two paragraphs refer to Tahare and refer to the unveiling of Tahare in the conference in Badasht. And he says this was like a trumpet call which announced the beginning of a process of the abolition of the Sharia law in Muslim countries. So the Sharia law, which is the canonical law, the Islamic law, based on the Quran, based on traditions, based on the behavior of the Prophet, etc., which was formulated after the life of Muhammad, after the passing of Muhammad, maybe 200, 300 years later. This canonical law, which is known as Sharia law, has certain requirements. One of them was the veiling of women. So when this is not clearly stated in the Quran. The Quran does not clearly state that women should be veiled. This was incorporated in the canonical law, in the Sharia law, which is not the same thing as the text of the Quran. It is an interpretation of the Quran, plus based on the Quran, as I said, plus on traditions. And some of the traditions have doubtful authentication, have doubtful validity. And of course the behavior of Muhammad himself. So they tried to put this canonical law into existence. And Shoghi Effendi says, when Tahir lifted her veil, she was breaking a law of the Sharia. Therefore, this was the beginning of the annulment of this Sharia law. It's a process. And he says this process will continue on until it will end in the secularization of the Muslim states of the Middle East. If you read the end, as I said, of chapter 2, the last two paragraphs of God Passes By, you see how Shoghi Effendi's vision is about the future. Now, if that is the case, and it will be the case, then this particular goal about courts, there will be no point at that time to carry it out, to implement it. But as I said, in 1953, under the conditions that existed at the time, this is how he formulated this particular goal. The next goal, number 12, is the extension of the international Baha'i endowments in the Holy Land, and the explanation which has been given is adequate, and you can see how much more property was acquired. The construction of the international Baha'i archives in the neighborhood of the Bab's sepulchre, you can see what has been explained here. The importance of the archives building is not the fact that we just have a building where we can have our tablets and our historical records and our holy relics preserved. It's not only that. It is that, of course, but it's not only that. It is this, Shoghi Effendi attached importance to this building, is that it is the beginning of this buildings around the Ark. He created this Ark, and he started this building of the archives. And he said this is going to develop, and this will be the administrative center of the faith. It's the Ark that Baha'u'llah spoke of in the tablet of Carmel. The Universal House of Justice is at the top, and the buildings are on both sides. So it was the beginning of this process of establishing the administrative center of the faith on Mount Carmel. The next item is construction of the tomb of the wife of the Bab in Shiraz. Now, the question number 14, number 15, number 16. All of them are goals that have to do with historical figures of our faith, as well as historical sites and sacred sites of our faith to be acquired, or for some of these very important historical figures, such as the wife of the Bab, for example, under number 14, the mother of the Bab, the cousin of the Bab, the transfer of their remains, and the construction of appropriate resting places for them, as well as the acquisition of properties. For example, here we see under number 16, acquisition of the Garden of Rizwan in Baghdad, the site of the Siyah Chal in Tehran, the site of the martyrdom of the Bab in Tabriz, and his incarceration in Chehriq. So you see, these are properties that Shoghi Effendi wanted to see that the Baha'is acquire them. Now, under certain conditions, this was not possible in those days, under the regime that existed at that time, for the Baha'is to do this. In Iran, it became worse with the revolution, with Khomeini and all this. It became even more difficult. And it is still, of course, very, very difficult. They are still, the latest thing is that they have desecrated the, let us say, the cemetery in Yazd. They went there and broke all the stones and desecrated the cemeteries. So we are suffering under such a regime. How is it possible for us to go ahead and acquire the site of the martyrdom of the Bab? The site of the martyrdom of the Bab, there is a building on it now. That building has to be demolished so that we acquire that piece of property. The old construction, that wall on which the Bab was suspended with Ali Muhammad Zunuzi, this is all gone. It is demolished. But the site is there, but on the side there is a building. So to acquire this first, to demolish the building, to try and construct something as possible, if it is possible, to construct something which was similar to what it was, and for them, the Baha'is, to go there and visit. See how many changes have to occur in Iran before we can do this. The transfer of the remains of the wife of the Bab, which was in Shiraz, to transfer her remains, to bring it to the Baha'i cemetery or to a special property dedicated to the wife of the wife, to dedicate to the wife of the Bab, and to construct something beautiful for her. All these things are not possible now. But again, I repeat, these are all commitments of the House of Justice, that they consider these to be close to their hearts. As soon as circumstances permit, they will go ahead. You can be sure. And of course, there are so many other. I have given explanations. I don't need to go into more details because of the time element. The quadrupling of the number of national assemblies, this is very clear. It is the number of assemblies that have to be increased, and we have given the statistical information. The multiplying the number of national Haziratul Qudses and their establishment in the chief cities and so on, that is also very clear. It means how many new national Baha'i centers have to be acquired and constructed. Number 19 and number 20 have to do with the framing of constitutions. In other words, the adoption of bylaws and declarations of trust by national spiritual assemblies, as well as the incorporation of national assemblies. Now, what is the meaning of incorporations? Incorporations can be either national or local. The incorporation, a national incorporation, means that the National Assembly goes to the country and says, we are an elected body of the National Spiritual Assembly. This has happened in Italy. It has happened probably in most of the countries that you represent. They go to the country and they say, we are a National Spiritual Assembly of the Baha'i community. We would like to register ourselves as an association of the Baha'is, and be recognized as a legal entity with legal personality in order to be able to acquire property and register such properties in our name. So this is called a legal incorporation. The government says, what is your constitution? Here is our constitution. And then they read the constitution, they see nothing wrong with it against the laws of the country. They accept the National Spiritual Assembly and they give a certificate to the National Assembly that you are an incorporated, registered, legal body. You can go to court, you can defend yourself in court as a legal person, as a legal personality. So this is the meaning of incorporation. You have national incorporation and you have local incorporation. Shoghi Effendi wanted both. Wanted national assemblies to be incorporated as soon as circumstances would permit, as well as, of course, local assemblies. The next goal is establishment of 6 national Baha'i publishing trusts. Now, this National Baha'i Publishing Trust, the word trust is used here in the sense not... it doesn't mean that the word trust must be used. You can call it National Baha'i Company. You can call it, Baha'i Publishing Company. You can call it Baha'i Publishing Association. The word trust was used by Shoghi Effendi because he liked so much the way that the British Publishing Committee was able to go to the British government and incorporate itself. So he recommended the word trust in this case. And if we can preserve it, so much the better. But the reality of it is to be able to have a body which is the National Spiritual Assembly itself, incorporated a second time, but this time as a body with the permission to publish, a publishing house. So instead of calling itself National Spiritual Assembly Publishing House, he says it's better to call it Baha'i Publishing Trust. But it is really, in effect, the National Spiritual Assembly itself. Then the next item is the establishment of 6 national Baha'i... The next one is participation by women of Persia and the membership of national and local assemblies. This goal was very dear to the heart of Shoghi Effendi. He wanted this to happen. Abdul Baha wanted it to happen. But then towards the end of his life, Shoghi Effendi said the time had come and the Baha'is in Iran could become members of national and local spiritual assemblies. And as you see, I have put here that there were other countries in the East: Egypt, Sudan, Tunisia, Libya, Arabian Peninsula, Jordan, Lebanon, Turkey. Some of them had already done this, but Iran had not yet done it. Some of these countries, immediately as soon as Iran did it, they also did it. The next one is the establishment of 7 Israel branches of national spiritual assemblies. Now this requires some explanation. What does Shoghi Effendi mean by having Israel branches? Shoghi Effendi saw that we had properties, of course, in the Holy Land. He did not want these properties to be in the name only of one legal entity. Who was the legal entity in the days of Shoghi Effendi? It was himself, guardian of the Baha'i faith. In the days of Abdul Baha, who was the legal entity to acquire property and register property in that name? It was Abdul Baha himself. So, for example, if you go to the Haifa, see the Baha'i cemetery in Haifa, if you go and look in the records of the land registry in Haifa, you see that the Baha'i cemetery in Haifa is registered in the name of Abbas Effendi, son of Hussein Ali, Baha'u'llah. It is still, at this time, registered in the name of Abdul Baha, you see. Now, of course, the House of Justice has taken action to transfer all these names into the names either the Baha'i World Center or one of the Israel branches. Now, the Israel branches. Shoghi Effendi started by establishing Palestine branches of national assemblies. That was the first step that he took. How did he do it? he studied the laws in Palestine under the British mandate, and he saw that there was a possibility of having what is known today in Israel as friendly societies. Friendly societies. A friendly society is an association of people who do not have any political intentions. Their only purpose is to acquire property and register them in their own name. They have to have a set of bylaws, and it was very simple to draw a page and a half of bylaws. Shoghi Effendi drew that up. And he said, now here is an association. The name of the association is National Spiritual Assembly of the Baha'is of the United States and Canada, Palestine branch. In other words, the National Spiritual Assembly, any given National Assembly, the US or the British or any National Assembly in the world, had a branch of its own in the Holy Land. This is what it means, Palestine branch. Who was the Palestine branch? It was himself. He and his secretary, whoever was his secretary at the time. So he signed as president of this friendly society, and his secretary as secretary of the friendly society. And they had these bylaws, and they went to the government and registered this association as what has this title, National Spiritual Assembly of the Baha'is of, let us say, Canada, National Spiritual Assembly of the Baha'is of Germany, National Spiritual Assembly of the Baha'is of Italy, or whatever it was, Palestine branch. When the state government, when Israel was changed, the Holy Land was changed, and the mandate came to an end, and it became Israel, then instead of Palestine branch, he had to put Israel branch, because the name of the country had now changed. So it became Israel branch. So he continued the same system with other national spiritual assemblies. And he said that all the properties in the Holy Land will be eventually transferred in the names of national spiritual assemblies with their Israel branches. He went as far as registering an association or a friendly society called National Spiritual Assemblies of the Baha'is of Iran Israel branch. Who is representing the Israel branch? Shoghi Effendi, with his secretary. And he transferred on Mount Carmel, Bob on the street, in the name of the Baha'is of Iran, Israel branch. And it is now in the name of the Iran. He used to jokingly say, the Israel government. So he took another step in his comments to the friends. He used to say, he actually wrote this in one of his letters. He said that it was not only his hope and vision that the properties in the Holy Land will be transferred in the name of national spiritual assemblies in this way, but he hoped, and this is a very important point for you to remember, that the holy places in Iran, the holy places in Iraq, the holy places in Turkey associated with Baha'u'llah will in the long run be also registered in the names of national spiritual assemblies throughout the world. So that, for example, your national spiritual assembly, wherever you come from, will have in its name properties one day in the Holy Land, some piece of land or some piece of property in Turkey, some piece of property in Iraq, and some property in Iran. This was his vision, so that the holy places and the historic sites of the Baha'i world will be in the name of the different national spiritual assemblies throughout the world. That was his hope, his vision. And you can be sure that the House of Justice considers all these hopes, all these plans of Shoghi Effendi to be sacred and to be part and parcel of their own commitments. The next item is establishment of a national Baha'i printing press in Tehran. Of course, this was not possible, because to have a national printing press, you have to have a special permission from the government, and the government will never give a special permission to the National Assembly to have a printing press. But they continued to have unofficially, of course, ways and means to print and publish and circulate Baha'i literature. Reinforcement of the ties binding the Baha'i world community with the United Nations. This is something that you are all familiar with, and you know how active we are in New York, in Geneva, through the different agencies that we have in order to become members of UNDP, of UNICEF, of UNIFEM, of WHO, WFO, and so on. And we have status as non-governmental organization, but international non-governmental organization, because you have national NGOs and you have international NGOs. Okay, the next item is inclusion of 11 republics comprised within the Union of the Soviet Republics. Now, it was impossible at that time to send any pioneers to these countries, and so this matter remained pending until there was a change in the government, in the Soviet, when this so-called Iron Curtain was removed. And this took some time. It was till 1990 until it was possible, when the regime in the Soviet Republic was when it collapsed, it was possible then for pioneers to go. As soon as it was possible, pioneers rushed to these countries, to these republics, and now, as you know, in all these republics, we now have national spiritual assemblies. And finally, the convocation of a World Congress in the Garden of Rizwan. Now, this question of the convocation of a World Congress in Baghdad was something that, of course, inspired the imagination of Baha'is when this goal was announced by the Guardian. We hope that maybe something will happen in Iraq and we'll be able to have this World Congress in 1963 there. But of course it did not happen. Just as in Iran there was no change, in Iraq there was no change at that time. In the Soviet Union there was no change at the time of the passing of Shoghi Effendi. It happened later. And this thing is still pending. Of course, 1963 came and the Congress had to be held somewhere. It could not be held in Baghdad. It had to be held somewhere else. The logical place, the hands of the cause decided, would be London, because Shoghi Effendi was already buried there, and the friends were longing, in any case, to go and visit the resting place of Shoghi Effendi. So they thought the logical place would be London. And that's where the Congress was held in 1963. And so, for the first time in the history of the Baha'i faith, we had nearly 7,000 Baha'is coming from all over the world attending this World Congress. And they all were able to visit the resting place of Shoghi Effendi and pay their respects to the guardian of the Baha'i faith at that time. It was a very moving experience for all Baha'is. And those of us, I don't know how many of you were present at this Congress. There, 1, 2, 3, if you allow me, I'll count myself. 4 of us were present at this Congress. The father of Margaret, Appa, was a member of the National Spiritual Assembly of the British Isles at that time. And he was chosen by the National Spiritual Assembly to be the Master of Ceremonies for the Congress. And he was quite often holding the loudspeaker in his hand and making announcements to the friends about the arrangements, the physical arrangements and so on. It was a very moving experience. All the hands of the cause were there. And for the first time, the members of the Universal House of Justice, who had just been elected in Haifa, all of the 9 members were able to attend. And on a special occasion, they were introduced to the Congress, and they all stood up there. And you can imagine how many eyes shed tears as they looked at an institution that was ordained in the Kitab-e-Aqdas, and it was the primary purpose of Shoghi Effendi to establish throughout his period of guardianship. Now this, as far as the 27 objectives are concerned, I think we have covered now these objectives, and I have given you explanations, appropriate explanations, I hope, on what they meant and what had to happen. Now, during this period, Shoghi Effendi, as I told you before, had the idea of national assemblies spinning off, national assemblies coming into existence in the course of the plan. So here he was with 12 national assemblies at the beginning. Now it's 1956. 3 years have passed. So Shoghi Effendi, what does he do? He says the time has come now for 3 new national assemblies to be added to the number of 12. So instead of 12, we will have 15. And did he choose? He chose Africa. He took the whole continent of Africa. He saw there was only one national spiritual assembly there. It's not carrying on. He saw that there was only one national assembly there, which was the National Assembly of Egypt and the Sudan. That was the only one there. So what he did was, he took this National Assembly and enlarged its area of jurisdiction. And said the name, instead of being Egypt and the Sudan, will become the National Spiritual Assembly of a larger region, and it will be Northeast Africa. But the number had not changed. It was still 12. Then he took the rest of Africa and he divided it into 3 big regions. In the south, he had one big regional national assembly. It was the name of it was South and West Africa, and it comprised nearly 15 countries and islands. Then he took, between South Africa and Northeast Africa, he took East Africa and Central Africa, countries such as the Congo, such as Chad, such as Central African Republic, such as other countries like Brazzaville, Congo, the French Congo Brazzaville, Congo Kinshasa, which was Congo Leopoldville, and so on. He took all this whole section and called it Central and East Africa. So we had at the top, we had Northeast Africa, which extended, even included Libya, and included Abyssinia, included Ethiopia, all that section. We had down there South Africa, and we had in the center East and Central Africa. And then the rest of the country the rest of the continent, which was all the way from Cameroon, all along the coast, all the way up to Tunisia, 25 countries, and anything in between. He called it Northwest Africa. Big region. It had 25 countries included. He called these regional national assemblies as interim national assemblies. Regional interim national assemblies. In other words, they were temporary, intermediary stage or stages in the final stage, which would be the independent the independent country itself having its own national assembly. So this is the first thing that happened during the 10-year Crusade, the first spinning off. Then 1 year later, now this is now 1957, then he added 13 new national spiritual assemblies. He looked at the rest of the world and he created 13 new national spiritual assemblies. So we had 13 new national assemblies there, plus 3, it became 16, plus 12, it became 28. So when Shoghi Effendi passed away, there were 28 national spiritual assemblies at Rizwan 1957. And what did Shoghi Effendi do? He sat down and he wrote a special Rizwan message for each of these national spiritual assemblies. It was as if he was telling them goodbye. It is heart-rending to read those messages of the Guardian to these national assemblies. He did not say that this is going to be my last message, obviously. But when you read the message, you see that it's as if he is expressing all his hopes, all his aspirations for these national assemblies, how they should develop. And I tried somehow to include parts of these things in these notes so that you will have an understanding of how these subsidiary NSAs with their subsidiary national plans came into existence. Now, there is a section also in these notes about the difference or the differences on page 14, the differences of the 10-year crusade when you compare the 10-year crusade to other previous national plans. I tried to include for you the differences. For example, Shoghi Effendi's World Crusade, paragraph 2 of page 14, differed from the first and second 7-year plan of the North American community because its scope was now worldwide. 10 of the objectives had been assigned by him as responsibilities of the World Center. Then he had Hands of the Cause, which he didn't have before. So he had asked Hands of the Cause to consult on his behalf with these national spiritual assemblies. This did not exist before. And act as his representatives in conferences that were held in order to launch the 10-year crusade. And then he had this question of collaboration. All these lines that you see in his maps, each of the 12, there are certain lines that start from these generals, from these bases of the work of the 10-year crusade, to see where the pioneers should go, what responsibilities have been assigned to them, and what they should do. This sort of collaboration between national assemblies was something also new, except for those 2 years of the African campaign, which was just the beginning of that process. And the way that he really, towards the end of his life, he said that at the midway point of the 10-year crusade, there should be again continental conferences to be held. And he wanted the Baha'is to know each other, to mix with each other. All this was a preparation, when it was only with the benefit of hindsight, after that these things happened, and we looked back and we understood that that's what his purpose was. His purpose was for the Baha'i world to know each other at these conferences. Because all these were preparations. The 10-year Crusade was the last stage in his preparations for the election of the Universal House of Justice. He wanted the Baha'i world to mix with each other, to know each other, to associate with each other. So this was all when you see the differences between the 10-year plan and previous plans. Then on pages 15, 16 and 17, I have outlined for you messages that show that he knew that his time was very close. And he wanted the Baha'is to realize this, that the future of the cause depended on them. And as I already told you, this message of June of 1957, I have quoted it on page 16, at the top of page 16, June 4, 1957. And I have tried to pick up the main sentences of this message to show you how Shoghi Effendi was now telling the Baha'i world, friends, you have to do it yourselves. I have done what I could. From now on, you should do it yourselves. I remember this message of June 4, 1957, when a copy was received in our home when we were in Kampala. And I was sitting with Yolette's father, Mr. Banani, and we were reading this message together. And the way that the language that Shoghi Effendi has used in this message, that, for example, I'll read you this particular message, this particular sentence, because it's very important. It's the last few lines of that first paragraph on page 16. The security of our precious faith, the preservation of the spiritual health of Baha'i communities, the vitality of the faith of its individual members, the proper functioning of its laboriously erected institutions, the fruition of its worldwide enterprises, and the fulfillment of its ultimate destiny are all directly dependent on the befitting discharge of the weighty responsibilities resting upon the members of these two institutions. The two institutions, when you read the message, the full message, he is referring to the hands of the cause of God throughout the world and the national spiritual assemblies throughout the world. In other words, what he is saying is, friends, all these things, which includes the fruition of the work of the faith throughout the world, which includes the fulfillment of the destiny of the faith of Baha'u'llah throughout the world, this depends now not on me. It depends on collaboration between the hands and the national spiritual assemblies. And I remember as we read this message with Mr. Banani, he looked at me and I looked at him. We were sitting at the table together, and we both had the same feeling. The feeling was that this was like a will and testament of Shoghi Effendi. That it certainly, you could smell something here. The scent was that he was implying that I'm not going to be with you anymore. This was in June of 1957. And the dear heart of this hand of the cause, Mr. Banani, sensed this feeling, this impression that Shoghi Effendi wanted to give us. It it was only after the passing of Shoghi Effendi that we both remembered this conversation we had at the table as we read this very moving message of the Guardian. I want you to read these 15, 16, 17 very carefully. The following section we will discuss tomorrow, but I want you to look at them very carefully during your studies. Duties incumbent on the National Assembly. And the following sections, duties on the individual believer, and so on and so forth. I want you to read those. It is as if these have been gleaned from his last messages to these national spiritual assemblies. These points that you find here. We have gleaned them, we have pulled them out from these last farewell messages. And you can see what he's telling the Baha'i world and how applicable some of these things are today for each one of us. That's it for today. To know that Violette and I were deeply impressed yesterday when the speakers came and made their presentations. We were very, very impressed by that. Certainly there was a great improvement in the quality of the reports of these workshops. I would like to remind you once again that it was Shoghi Effendi's wish and hope that the youth would engage in public speaking. Now, if at the universities where you are studying there are no courses in public speaking, try to avail yourselves of every opportunity that you have in your lives to stand up and give a little talk. Don't be shy. Don't be afraid. You will change. It will become easier and easier as you go along. Because this is how we will be able to teach the cause to the world. We have to have the courage to stand up and speak. The other point is that I was very impressed when our dear Saba quoted from the writings of Shoghi Effendi by heart. He had memorized the passage. You yourself will judge that it is one thing to have a book or a piece of paper and read from it, from the writings, which is, of course, has a great influence because it's either revealed word or inspired word. However, the influence will be, believe me, 100-fold if you memorize it. It becomes part of you, and then you are able to quote it. When you are giving your public speeches, you can include such passages that you have memorized. It is important for us also to remember that this idea of memorizing from the writings is something that Baha'u'llah himself has recommended in his tablets. And Abdul Baha has repeated, and Shoghi Effendi has repeated again. So it is something that comes from the very source of our revelation for us to memorize. And the more you memorize, the easier it will be for you to deliver speeches and include in your speeches such quotations as you have memorized. When the prisoners, the Baha'is, were imprisoned in Iran, they couldn't carry with them any of the texts, but so many of them had memorized passages from the writings, prayers, the entire tablet of Ahmad, and so on. So these were with them. And in reports that we received in the Holy Land, it was so moving to read in these reports when these prisoners were released to say that when they had few opportunities to meet each other, one of the first things they did was to double check. He says, in the tablet of Ahmad, after that sentence, what was the next sentence? I had forgotten. Do you remember? They would exchange memories and recollections of these texts to bring themselves up to date and have the passages correctly memorized. And that is the thing that gave them strength in prison, as they repeated these words to themselves. So these are things that you find in the writings. Of course, teaching the cause is something which, from the stories that Violette has told us, we realize how important it is for us to engage in the teaching work. I am no more on the House of Justice, but we are, instead of being in Haifa, now we are traveling. And the teaching work is not moving ahead as it should be. It should be much faster than what it is now. And it brings up our hearts a great deal of sadness to see this. When we see that there are opportunities to teach the cause, but some of the Baha'is are not teaching. And I think the greatest service you can render your own communities when you go back is to start teaching yourselves on however small a scale. But do it. And become an example to others. You don't have to advertise yourself. Just quietly teach the cause. Make it a point of delivering the message. And as I told you, it was Shoghi Effendi's wish that we would be able to mention Baha'u'llah once every day. Now he wrote this. It's not a pilgrim's note. And it was his wish that we should have firesides in our home. Minimum once every 19 days. And it was the wish of Abdul Baha that we should guide and lead people to the cause. One soul every year. Of course, God himself guides people. In the Quran it says that God tells Muhammad, he said, do you think you are guiding people? You're guiding those people that you want to guide? No. He's the prophet of God. But he himself, of course, when the messengers and prophets say things, it is for our education. They are trying to teach us something. So that's how they ascribe it to themselves. They say, God told me. What they mean is, God told you. But they take it on themselves. This is explained by Abdul Baha in some answered questions. So, when in the Quran God tells Muhammad, he says, you think you will guide those people that you want to guide? No. It's God who guides souls to his own cause. It is true, therefore, to say that we don't guide people into the cause. This is true. But we are instruments, nevertheless. God needs instruments. And this is what we are. This is what we hope to be. This is what we hope that He will accept us when we offer ourselves and use us, however unworthy we may be, however weak we may feel we are. And of course, compared to the standard in the writings, we are all unworthy. We are all inadequate. All of us, no exception. We have to trust in Him and arise. Okay, we come now to this section on section 6 of these notes. I just want to explain that on page 16, at the bottom of the page, a statistical number has been given, which may cause you some doubt as to whether it is correct or not. It says, in addition to the above, he sent to each of the 26 national spiritual assemblies functioning at that time. We may think that this is a wrong number here, but it is a correct number. It is 26. And I'll just explain to you something that I have to include in the notes when the final notes are put in shape. I have to include this. I have omitted explaining this. Shoghi Effendi's policy of forming national assemblies, he had two methods that he used. One I have already mentioned, which is when a national assembly spins off or branches off from another one. For example, we had United States and Canada separated itself and became an independent national assembly. Now, in the course of the plan of the 10-year crusade, we had the same thing. We had, for example, Australia and New Zealand, and in the days of Shoghi Effendi, New Zealand separated itself and became an independent national assembly. We had India, Pakistan, and Burma. Pakistan was strong enough to become a separate national assembly in the days of Shoghi Effendi, during part of those 13 national assemblies that I mentioned. So this was one way, this branching off, this spinning off. Okay. The other one was when he had a very large regional interim national spiritual assembly, such as, for example, in the case of Central America and South America. Then he broke it down. He split it down, so that the entire region, instead of being one big region, became, let us say, 3 or 4 sections. Again regional, but smaller numbers. Instead of being 20 countries in one region, you had 5, 6 countries, or 3, 4 to use in the formation of national assemblies. In the case of Central America and South America, he applied the second method. In other words, he took these two national assemblies and broke them down. You had the 3 additional ones in Africa. That came 12 plus 3 is 15. Then we said you had 13 new national assemblies. 13 added to the 15 should be 28. But instead of 28, you see in your notes 26. The reason is that these 2 national assemblies of South America and Central America disappeared because they broke down into smaller units. And this is why we did not have 28, but we had 26. It was not the branching off where the original MSA continued to exist, and there was something, a new child born, if you like. This was a different type of establishment of national assemblies. Okay, on the next page, on page 17 and 18, you have a list of points that Shoghi Effendi impressed the Baha'is with in his last messages to them. And these points have been gleaned from those messages. Some of them are pretty straightforward. and do not need further clarification. But I felt that a few of them needed some comment, and therefore I will proceed to do so. For example, take number 2 and 3 of the first section, which is duties incumbent on the National Assembly. The National Assembly to regard itself as a loving parent, not a stern judge. Also, to replace harsh measures with loving forbearance when dealing with the community in general. However, to make no compromises when the behavior of any of the friends is flagrantly disgraceful to the faith. See, he made a distinction between somebody, let us say, once in a while he goes and has some beer. Many months, over years pass, and he doesn't drink. But again, maybe he will drink a little bit. This is one thing. Another thing is for someone to drink all the time and go openly and very publicly to bars and drink and become drunk. And we have had such Baha'is too, and hoping and thinking that he's serving the cause while drunk in the bar talking about Baha'u'llah and trying to teach the faith to these people, to these friends of his. So we have had Baha'is like that too. So when the behavior, please follow me carefully here. When the behavior of a Baha'i is such as to be blatant, as to be so open, so flagrant, as we say, that it becomes a disgrace for the faith. Look at the Baha'is, they say that we don't drink alcohol, but see, he is even a very outstanding member of the Baha'i community. Look, he is drunk. This is flagrant disregard and disobedience of the writings. It reflects very badly on the Baha'i community. So this is where Shoghi Effendi is telling national assemblies, take action. You can't allow this to continue. But if there's something which can be forgiven, forgotten, when it is something that can be corrected lovingly, patiently, what the National Assembly could do in such a case is to appoint somebody to go and talk to him. Say, listen, why are you doing this? This is not good. If you continue doing this, then you may have some trouble with the Baha'i administrative order. So try to change. This is not good. This is where he says, be a loving parent, instead of being a stern judge in every case. So we have to remember this general policy that Shoghi Effendi always advised the friends throughout his whole ministry, not only in these last messages. Another point is number 4, which I think bears some comment. To avoid adding rules and regulations of procedure, as under administration was better than over administration. This is a very important point. In the course of the week, I have been telling you how much Baha'is fall in love with the administration, because it's a beautiful thing, frankly. There's no question about that. And we want to elaborate the administration, make it bigger and more complicated all the time. So national spiritual assemblies start issuing orders and instructions and new procedures. And Shoghi Effendi did not like that. He said, keep the faith simple. Don't overdo it. Don't put all this extra weight, this extra burden on the shoulders of the Baha'is. Try to do it moderately, and don't add to the procedures that we already have. So this is something that has to be borne in mind generally. Now, the other points I think do not need further clarification. We turn the page and we go to page 18. For example, number 3 at the top there, to realize that the path ahead is thorny and tortuous, with tests and trials abounding. This is what Shoghi Effendi wanted us to know, that living the Baha'i life is a wonderful thing to do, whether we do it individually or whether we do it as a community, collectively. It's a good thing. It is a duty for us to do that. But we should not think that as we are carrying out our duties, that we are not going to have any difficulties. We are going to face difficulties. We have to remember this. Baha'u'llah in the Kitab-i-Iqan quotes a verse in the Quran where he says, the Prophet Muhammad says, do they think that they will not be put to proof, they will not be put to test when they say, I believe? It's impossible. Once we want to adhere to the faith, once we want to associate ourselves with the faith of God, identify ourselves with the faith of God, God tests us. And we should not be afraid of tests. We should be ready for tests. We should realize one important point. Tests are of two kinds. One type of tests are as a result of our misdeeds. It is more or less like a punishment. It comes to us, a trial, a problem. And we cause it through our own ignorance, our own failure, our own weakness. But tests also come to us not in order to punish us, but tests come to us in order to perfect us, to make us better Baha'is, to improve our conduct, to deepen our faith. That's why tests come to us. It's a positive thing. It is like purifying gold. And the many questions, in fact, one of your presentations, some of you mentioned many of these analogies that we have in the writings, the metaphors we have in the writings for tests. When you have these friends here using their guitars, or a violin, or even a piano, from time to time, all these instruments need tuning. This poor guitar has to be tuned almost maybe 2-3 times every day. Before anyone can play the guitar, he has to make sure that it's tuned. Tuning is painful. No question about that. But necessary. And that's what God does to us. So when He says that the path is going to be thorny, this is what He means. It's going to be tortuous. It's not going to be straight. It's going to be all kinds of curves and problems and ups and downs. And it's going to be, the tests and trials will be abounding. I think I'll stop here for a moment because I see that our dear Noemi is ready. Noemi has been working very hard during the night, in addition to her participation in the program here last night. And our dear Margaret has been working with her very hard in order to produce for you a sheet that I will ask her now to distribute. Thank you very much. I'm not discussing this with you this minute, but we have to discuss it this morning. So just hold on to the sheet until the time comes for us to refer to it. So we carry on page 18. The next point that I think needs to have some comment is number 5 on page 18. To acquire a deeper understanding of the genesis, the significance, the workings, and the present status and achievements of the faith's administrative order, as well as the Baha'i covenant on which it is based. This is what Shoghi Effendi in his last messages kept telling the Baha'is. He knew, as I told you, that his end was near. He knew that there will be many tests because of his sudden passing. He knew that the friends had to be deepened in the administrative order, as well as in the covenant. So he included this point in several of his messages to the Baha'is, that understand your covenant, which is the covenant of God, the covenant of Baha'u'llah, the covenant of Abdul Baha. Understand the administrative order, because the administrative order is based on the covenant. It is the child of the covenant. This is what we did last year, and this is what we are continuing to do this year. This is precisely in the spirit of what Shoghi Effendi wanted us to do. The last point in that section is to be aware that the maximum spiritual influence of the national institutions of the faith depends on the degree of self-sacrifice of the contributors to the fund. This is an important Baha'i principle that Shoghi Effendi repeatedly wrote about in his messages. In a way, it is a novel idea. What is Shoghi Effendi saying? He's saying, from what I understand, he's saying that you have a project. For example, whether it is on the local level, national level, or international level. Of course, he was addressing national assemblies. But we will now give the example of the World Center, because it becomes clearer when we think of it internationally. All right. Abdul Baha wanted to dig the foundations on Mount Carmel. He needed property to be purchased. He had to build the original structure of the Shrine of the Bab. All this needed money. There are very, very few Baha'is in the world at that time. But they knew what the need was. They deprived themselves of many things and offered contributions to Abdul Baha for these projects. The same thing happened with Shoghi Effendi, building this beautiful Shrine of the Bab. Or the American Baha'is building their first Baha'i temple, the foundation stone of which was laid by Abdul Baha himself, the most sacred, if you like, of all temples. all this needed money. Shoghi Effendi looked at the Baha'i world. There were not too many Baha'is. There were not as many as we have today. But nevertheless, these projects had to go ahead. It took a lot of self-sacrifice on the part of the Baha'is to do this. They offered from their substance. They deprived themselves from comforts, from pleasures, in order to offer their contributions to the head of the faith. Now, this is just a little background. Now, what is Shoghi Effendi saying here? He says, the more the sacrifice of the Baha'is in offering funds for the faith or for a specific project, the greater will be the influence of that project when completed. In other words, if today we see the beauty, the charm, the influence of the shrine of the Bab, the shrine of Baha'u'llah, the gardens, and the properties in the Holy Land, this, he says, is of course partly due to the very existence of these holy sites associated with Baha'u'llah and Abdul Baha and the Bab. That's true. But it has also a special effect because of the sacrifice that went into creating these projects. You see, this is the point. And therefore, on the national level, he says, he's telling the Friends now, your National Assembly, they have many expenses. They have projects, they have buildings, they have institutions, they have publishing trusts. They have to run all these different institutions, agencies, operating under them. If we, Baha'is, support this, the greater our sacrifice is in offering from our substance to our National Assembly, the more and the greater will be the influence of these projects when completed. In other words, let us say we're talking about the publishing trust. If we help the publishing trust will have greater influence in Italy. This is the point. This is one reason why one of the basic principles of the faith is not accept money from non-Baha'is for the work of the faith, because it should come from the heart of the believers themselves. These projects, these institutions we create are institutions that are a gift of the Baha'is to humanity. So it's our gift. This is why we don't accept money from others. Do it ourselves. If we are few, if we are a little bit more than few, it doesn't matter. We do it in the spirit of self-sacrifice. And the greater the self-sacrifice, the greater the influence of these institutions. Then the next section is the duty of individual believer. And the first point is very important. I would like, in the printed text here, the second line, there is a word all, A-double-L, all, that Bahia emphasizes in her presentations to us. Please underline all believers. This point of universal participation of the Baha'is in offering contributions to the fund is something which Shoghi Effendi emphasized over and over again. There is a difference in contributions to the fund, whether local, national, and huququllah. These are two different things. When it comes to huququllah, Baha'u'llah says those who have not reached a certain amount of money, of wealth, are exempt from paying huququllah, paying their huququllah to the fund. He exempts them. They are free. They should not pay. It's not binding on them. This is for huququllah. But when it comes to contributions to local and national funds and the international fund as distinct from Hukukullah fund. These contributions are binding on all the believers. This is a major distinction we have to bear in mind. Hukukullah, there is exemption. In the case of contributions to the funds, there is no exemption. He says all of us must participate, however poor we may be. Addressing the poor, Allah says, you are poor. First of all, the poor should know begging is prohibited. That's one thing He has told poor. He has told us not to give money to beggars. Those of us who have some money, not to give money to the beggars, because begging not become a profession. If somebody is in need of money, the institutions will look after that person or that family. So begging is sets aside this as a prohibition, to receive and to give. This is one thing. Then he tells the poor, he says, it's in leanings. He tells the poor, conceal your poverty. Hide your poverty. Don't display your poverty. Because poor people have the habit of displaying their poverty. He tells them, don't do it. This is in the gleanings. The other thing he tells the poor, he says, engage in some kind of profession in order to generate funds for yourself. That's how he deals with the poor. And then when it comes to contributions to the fund, he says, however poor you are, give something to the fund. He wants even the poor who depends on these few cents for a dinner for himself and his children, to so budget his life to be able to give just a little something to the fund. Universal participation. Because we are members of this human body. Every single cell is part of the body. It receives from the body and it offers its own strength, whatever it is, however little it may be, for the health and well-being of the body. This is universal participation. Of course, we don't have universal participation in the Baha'i world, but that is the aim, that is the goal, that is the objective, that is the standard that we have to reach. It is the duty of national spiritual assemblies, of course, to remind us of these things. It is likewise the duties of counselors, of auxiliary board members, of assistants, to continually educate us in these principles. The next point, I think, which needs attention is number 4 of duties of the individual believer, to deepen in the understanding of the faith as well as in one's love for it. It is the word love that you may wish to underline. It is not enough to accept that, yes, I know the administrative order now, I know that we have a universal House of Justice and national assemblies, and these are pillars, and there is that dome on top, and we have counselors, or I understand it all. It's not enough. He says we must begin to love our institutions. If you have a local assembly, you have to disregard the fact that there is one member there that you don't like. You have to forget that. We have to learn how to make a distinction between the membership of an institution and the institution itself. They're two different things. I remember when the news was received very recently that Mr. Semple and Mr. Martin, members of the Universal House of Justice, have resigned from the membership because of their age, and they are leaving, and the National Assemblies of the world have to elect 2 other members for the Universal House of Justice. I had a friend in Ireland who wrote to me a letter, and he said, you know, there was a time when I knew personally every member of the Universal House of Justice. I knew them personally. And I see the time is coming when I will not know any one of them. I don't know who they will be. Then the thought came to me. I said to myself, why am I expecting to know every member of the Universal House of Justice? This Universal House of Justice is an institution created by Baha'u'llah to continue for a minimum of 1,000 years. Do I expect to know all the members that always come or are going to be elected to this to the Universal House of Justice throughout the dispensation? No. There is a distinction between the institution and members of the institution. Members come and go. The institution remains. We should learn how to love the institution. Turn our hearts to the institution. From the local level up to the universal level. We should love our local assemblies. We should know how to love our national spiritual assemblies. We should love the Universal House of Justice. Love is an important ingredient in the work and operation of the administrative order. Number 6, to avoid apathy, timidity, and complacency in the discharge of our spiritual responsibilities. Apathy is lack of interest. Apathy is, the faith of God is in the hands of God. Well, it's okay. There is news about developments in the cause. I'm not interested. I know the faith is going on, so it's fine. No, the faith of God is mine. It's my faith. I should feel that I own the faith. I should feel that this faith is part and parcel of my life. That's how I should be. I cannot have a sense of apathy, lack of interest. I must be interested. I must have sympathy. And I have love and affection for the faith. And no, I should be not, I say, a guardian of the Baha'i faith who was concerned about every single detail about the faith all over the world. We can never be like Shoghi Effendi. But to the extent that we can, we should be as interested about the faith of Baha'u'llah, its well-being, its growth, its development, its difficulties, as much as we are interested about our own family. We are interested about our family. If I have my own family, I have my daughter, I have my son, I have my grandchildren, I'm concerned about them. You have families, you are concerned about your family. The same degree of love and affection that we have for our families, we should have for the faith. This is the faith of God. Who is God? God is my beloved, the beloved of all hearts. That is His cause. Of course I love His cause. I should be interested in the health of this cause. So he says, avoid apathy. The second thing to avoid is timidity. What is timidity? To be timid, to be fearful. I cannot do it. I'm weak. I'm not competent. I don't know enough. These ideas, of course, I can understand. They are natural. And in many cases, we are weak. We cannot do certain things well. That's correct. And I want to tell you something. We at our age, we consider ourselves totally weak, totally incompetent. Still, we're trying. So timidity has to be cast away outside of this door and this window forever and forever. And instead, what should come is courage. Trust, not fear. Put fear aside and cling to the hem of the robe of Baha'u'llah. And be sure that He will be with you. If we are with Him, He will be with us. More than that, there are passages in the writings of Baha'u'llah in which he says that He will not only be with us if we are with Him, but He will show us that He is with us. We can see signs of His presence, signs of His interference, signs of His guidance and assistance. This is the meaning of the words of Christ. Blessed are those who are pure in heart, for they shall see God. It doesn't mean that they will see God, because God cannot be seen. When Moses was on Mount Sinai, he only heard the voice of God. He could not see God. So a pure in heart cannot see God, something that the prophet of God could not see. What does he mean? As I said, it means the signs of God. It means He will recognize. If we are pure in our hearts, if we are pure in our motives, we can feel that God is doing something. He is interfering. His invisible hand is at work. We see this. This is what it means. We see God. You see? So, but all these things are dependent upon our courage. We have to develop courage and cast away from our hearts fear. And you can do this through love of God, through faith in God, through your certitude, which will come as a result of your deepening of your faith, through confidence in God, through trust in God. And these things will come about in a very natural way. And then the last point is complacency. Complacency is just the opposite. Complacency is when you are self-satisfied with yourself. I am something, you know. I compare with myself with this neighbor of mine, see where I am. Or with this other Baha'i, I am better than him. I know better, more things than he does or she does. This is complacency. It is self-satisfaction. Complacency is self-satisfaction. Abdul Baha goes as far as saying that self-satisfaction is satanic. He's so absolutely emphatic. Yes, self-satisfaction is satanic. It is the ego which is working. Which is, I say to myself, well, I must be somebody, you know. I have given a course last year at Acuto, and I have given a course this year. I must be something. These ideas are egoistic. They are selfish. I try to please myself. Try to be complacent. That's another thing that Shoghi Effendi is telling us in these last messages to avoid. And finally, the last point is to endeavor daily and methodically to rise to loftier heights of consecration and self-abnegation. I think we'll stop here, continue later. Where towards the last part, under duties of the individual believer, to endeavor daily and methodically to rise to loftier heights of consecration and self-abnegation. When Mr. Olinga was on pilgrimage in 1957, one day Shoghi Effendi explained to him these terms, particularly this term of consecration. He said that every individual believer passes through 3 stages. The first stage is attraction. Attraction. This, of course, becomes much clearer when a person is not a Baha'i and is attracted to the faith. So that is the first. But even when we are born in a Baha'i family, a time comes when we become attracted to the teachings. We appreciate that we have these teachings and we feel attracted to them. So that is the first stage. The second stage is conversion. It is when the individual accepts Baha'u'llah and says, I would like to be a follower of Baha'u'llah. I want to be a member of the Baha'i community. So stage 1, he said, was attraction. Stage 2 was conversion. But then he said there is a stage 3, and that is consecration. And sometimes he would use the word dedication. Dedication or consecration. Now, many of us pass through the first stage, we are attracted. It is like a piece of metal, seeing fire and wanting to get closer to the fire. We are converted when we feel the heat of the fire and we like it and we acknowledge the fact, yes, this is fire and it has heat and it has warmed me. So this is conversion. And then, but this is not the end. Maybe we have met many Baha'is who have passed through the first stage and the second stage, and for the rest of their lives they remain in the second stage. And we must try and get to the third stage. Otherwise, we will not reach our destination. The third stage is consecration. See what a difference there is between attraction and conversion. It's a big difference. There is an even bigger difference, larger difference between conversion and consecration. Conversion is to be a follower of Baha'u'llah. Consecration is to be a lover of Baha'u'llah. Not only a believer, but a lover, an ardent lover, an intoxicated lover. That's what he wants us to be. And that is the third stage. So when he's saying here to endeavor daily, on a daily basis, and methodically is we must have a plan. We must have a will, a determination, a plan of action, so that it becomes methodical, it becomes systematic. So it's not only the institutions that have to become systematic. We have to learn how to become methodical and systematic in our personal lives. This is why you see that the House of Justice called on the believers, or all of us, every believer in the whole world, to have a plan for ourselves. And as I said earlier on, what a wonderful Baha'i community we will have if we have a plan on the international level from the House of Justice, which we do. We have plans under that umbrella made by national spiritual assemblies, and under the umbrella of that national plan, local assemblies then develop and adopt their own local plans for the community. And then, in addition to all this, then each one of us has a plan. We sort of try and adopt certain goals for our lives. And we say, let's do it systematically, methodically, as Shoghi Effendi is saying here, so that we move step by step forward. And this is how we can change ourselves. We can transform ourselves through the power of the cause. As I told you before, I repeat myself, that we can submit ourselves to the cause and allow the forces of the cause to change us, to recreate us. We should never lose hope. We should always be optimistic, always hopeful that the change will come, but it will come gradually. We have to have the determination to do it. And we have to do it prayerfully. We should turn in prayer to Him and tell Baha'u'llah that we are weak, that we need His help, that we cannot do it alone. And He will come to our aid. And we will not only astonish others, but we will astonish ourselves too. Self-abnegation, abnegation comes from this negation. To abnegate, that means to tell my ego, no. I should have the courage to tell my own ego that speaks, no, shut up, please. I have to have that courage, because the ego is always there. Self-abnegation, it means self-denial, to negate the voice of self and control that voice and allow the voice of the soul, of your conscience, to speak, to tell you, because the poor soul and the poor conscience wants to speak, but this voice of the ego is so loud that it drowns the voice of the soul. But when you put that ego aside with all its manifestations, then you can hear the sweet voice of your own soul. That gift from God, that ray from God, which is in each one of us. Then that can make itself heard. And you lead, and with the writings that you have in your hand, with the prayers that you will offer, all these things will combine, and then you will see what great changes have occurred. Okay, that will be the end of this section. Now we come to the other section, and in order to understand this last section of our course, with the help of our dear Margaret and Noemi, this thing was prepared for you last night. And I will ask Bahia to read for you on page 19 of section 6, the big paragraph on that page and the small paragraph following it, the 2 lines following it, starting from these different stages, and then the second paragraph ends, was now to begin. And you listen to these words carefully, because they are extracts from the letter of Shoghi Effendi. Everything in italics are extracts. So in one paragraph, we try to summarize this long message of Shoghi Effendi for you, that you find the references given, Messages from Baha'i World, pages 153 to 154. This has been summarized for you here. And this chart, this sketch here, is the same thing. This is an attempt to put in chart form what is expressed here in words. So as Bahia reads this for you, follow carefully and retain the thoughts and see how these can be placed on this sketch here, because this is what we are going to do for the rest of the morning.
These different stages, from the dawn of the Adamic cycle to the Prophet Muhammad, constituted the first part of the majestic process of the expression of the divine will. According to this message, during the dispensation of Adam, the tree of divine revelation was planted in the soil of divine will. And this tree was watered with the vernal showers of blood shed by countless martyrs during the successive dispensations of the Adamic cycle. In this message, he pointed out that the second and third parts constituted of the appearance of the perfect fruit of that tree, namely the barb. Sorry, has I made I can't read. Consisted of the appearance of the perfect fruit of that tree, namely the barb, as well as the grinding of that sacred seed in the mill of adversity, causing it to yield its oil in the city of Tabriz. The following three parts, according to this message, cover the period of the ministry of Baha'u'llah through the ignition of this oil by the hand of providence in the Siyah Chal of Tehran, followed by the appearance and diffusion of the flickering light of divine revelation, and the subsequent spread of the radiance of that light in Adrianople and Acre, when its rays reached parts of the Asiatic and African continents. The seventh part was the shedding of the illumination of this divine light upon 20 additional territories in the American, European, and Australian continents. The eighth part was the diffusion of that same light in the course of the first 32 years of the formative age of the faith, over a further 94 territories of the planet. Thus, the 8 parts constituting the period from the inception of the Adamic cycle until the year 1953, when the 10-year Crusade was launched, consists in a grand total of 6,109 years. That's 6,000 plus 77 plus 23 plus 9. Having thus brought us to the year 1953, Shoghi Effendi explained that in this inconceivably dramatic diffusion of the divine light, the 9th part was now to begin.
So an attempt was made to put this in the form of a chart. If you look at your charts now, and you see the first column is headed parts, and it starts, instead of starting from top to bottom, it starts from bottom upwards. So number 1 is at the very end, and then it becomes 2, 3, 4 until it reaches 10. Okay? So this is the first point to remember. The second point to remember is that he is talking about light. He's talking about the diffusion. Diffusion means the spread of light. And he says that this light had a preamble. Before he talks about the light, he wants to bring the Adamic cycle into play. So what is he saying in this passage here that Baha'i just read for us? If you imagine, if we had a chart here that we could draw for you, but you can now imagine it in your own minds. Here is a seed. We plant a seed here. This seed is the beginning of the Adamic cycle. This seed grows. It becomes a tree. Now, after 6,000 years, this tree yields a fruit. This fruit is the barb, according to this message of Shoghi Effendi. This fruit is the barb. Now, this fruit, during the period of 6 years, it lost its flesh, if you like, and there was another seed here now of that fruit. It was crushed, his martyrdom. This crushing of this seed of this fruit, the fruit of this 6,000 years of divine revelation, yielded an oil. Now 9 years have passed. Baha'u'llah comes and he, in the Siyachal of Tehran, he gives it that spark of fire. It touches the oil. You have a conflagration. You have the beginning of the illumination, the enlightenment of this fire, the enkindlement of this oil. This oil now is ignited. Now, for the rest of the dispensation, for the rest of the different parts that he has enumerated, he is now describing to you the diffusion. Diffusion is the spread, the dispersion, the casting of the light, the rays of this light throughout the planet. So, with this in mind, and this is still going on, this light is still going on, and then he takes our imaginations and he projects our imaginations into the future, up to the beginning of the 10-year crusade, about the 6,000 years, about the period of his own ministry, the period of the ministry of Abdul Baha, the period, part of the ministry of Shoghi Effendi, up to the point of the beginning of the 10-year crusade in the year 1953. Up to that point, then he says, this is now the end of the 8th part. That means everything from number 1 to number 8 is all of the past, and shows you here to what degree the light of the faith of Baha'u'llah spread throughout the world, from 2 countries to 15 countries, from 15 countries an additional of 20 countries. When Abdul Baha passed away, the light had spread to 35 countries of the world. But then the 10-year plan begins, and then there is a burst. And you, as a result of the 10-year crusade, you see a point where it says over 200 countries and all sovereign states and chief dependencies were illumined. Now this section here, which is under number 9, as you see, number 9 is divided into 2 parts. One is Shoghi Effendi from 1953 till 1957 when he passed away. And then from 1957 to 1963 you have Hands of the Cause, because that was during the period of the interregnum when Shoghi Effendi had passed away, and the Hands became the center of the cause in order to complete the 10-year crusade. During this period, what is the total? From 35, we reached over 250 countries in the world. But notice the way Shoghi Effendi has described these countries. He calls them sovereign states and chief dependencies. Now, what does he mean by chief sovereign states and dependencies? When he talks about sovereign states, he's talking about independent states. It was the wish of Shoghi Effendi, and he achieved it through the 10-year crusade, that the independent countries of the world will all be opened. All the sovereign states. That was his aim. But when it came to other territories which were not independent, which were dependencies, like colonies, the territories that were under a central government either in Europe or North America or elsewhere. These are called dependencies. They are not independent. Sovereign states are independent. So Shoghi Effendi's vision was that as a result of the 10-year crusade, all sovereign states, but not all dependencies. He selected some of the dependencies. They were the chief dependencies, in his opinion, at that time. So that is how the 10-year crusade ended. Now, when he finished, it was before he passed away, of course, but he was extending his mind, his vision to the end of the 10-year plan. And then he wants to go beyond that. This is where he uses such terms as diffusion, makes a distinction between three terms in this message. The three terms are diffusion, penetration, and suffusion. Diffusion of the light is when you take, for example, to make it easier for us, we look out from the window here and we see light diffused over this area of Italy. This is diffusion. When the light spreads. Now, the light of the cause did spread, and that was Shoghi Effendi's intention, that it should spread to all the sovereign states, all underlined, and chief dependencies, but not all dependencies, chief, important dependencies. So, extending his vision into the future as a legacy he is giving now to the House of Justice. What is he suggesting to the House of Justice? What is the path that he is now drawing for the House of Justice? First, he says, the continued diffusion of this light so that all the territories of the world, that there will not be a spot on earth, anywhere, small island even, anywhere in the world, wherever there is any population, there should be a presence of the Baha'i faith. Not only the chief territories or chief dependencies, all. This is one point he is making. And of course the House of Justice has taken this to heart. And this is what they are going to develop over the years. It still has not been achieved. There are still many spots on earth where the faith has not yet reached, where the diffusion, notice the term, the diffusion has not yet reached those territories. But this is that's part of that framework that Shoghi Effendi has given as a vision for the future to the House of Justice. This is point number one. Second, he says this light, which is now diffused all over the world, has to penetrate. There is a distinction between diffusion and penetration. When we are talking about penetration, we are talking about not only the light on top, but we are also talking about the heat which has to penetrate in the soil. This is a second stage. What is the second stage? How does he describe the second stage? In the quick reading that we heard, in the summary which is in your notes, maybe you don't notice what is meant by that. But we tried in this chart to bring your attention to this point as we understand it today. And our understanding will grow as the years go by. In the Kitab-i-Iran, we read that God utters a word, and by that word He has 71 meanings in mind. And we look at it and we see one point, and there are 70 other meanings hidden and concealed in the words of God. So these things will evolve. The understanding of the Baha'i world under the guidance of the Universal House of Justice will evolve, will become clearer and clearer as the years go by, as the decades go by. So now we come to the question of penetration. Now, our understanding has been put here. Maybe as you read these things more carefully yourself, you come to a different conclusion. God bless you. You're free to come to your own conclusions. But the way we understood it is the way that's on this paper. If you look at this paper now, you see penetration. We put after the word penetration in brackets, in parentheses, we put of heat. Because we are no more talking about the surface of the soil, which is the illumination and this diffusion of the light. We are now talking about penetration, the entry of that light. The entry of the light is its heat. So how does he define this stage? He defines it in the passage here as the erection of the entire machinery of the Baha'i administrative order in all territories. In other words, after the stage when the light has spread everywhere and every spot on earth has received the message of Baha'u'llah, there is a presence of the Baha'i faith in everywhere in the world, then the second stage, this penetration, is to have the entire machinery of the administrative order operating in that territory, whether it is a sovereign state or a dependency. The entire machinery of the administrative order means to have local spiritual assemblies, to have a national spiritual assembly, to have agencies of local assemblies such as committees and a local center, to have activities, to have a publication of, let us say, a news bulletin for the local community, and then on the national level, to have a national Hazirat of Quds, to have a national endowment, to have a national temple site, even to have the temple built in that little town or in that little country or that in that state, that sovereign state or dependent state. The entire machinery of the administrative order starts being fully established in that area, in that territory. This is the definition that he has given himself to this second stage. Diffusion, penetration, leading to the last stage, which is suffusion. Suffusion is different from diffusion. Diffusion is at the top, is the surface. We enter, we penetrate, we establish our machinery there fully, in its full form, in its administrative order form, and then the light, or the heat in this case, has to spread under the lower strata the lower levels, the inner tissues of this country, of this territory. Of course, this is a metaphor that Shoghi Effendi is using for us. He's using the metaphor of the light, the penetration of the light, the suffusion of the heat. But what he really is talking about is that the faith would be so fully established in each country of the world, whether dependent or independent, that it would affect the hearts and minds of the people, that everybody is affected directly or indirectly by the operation of the institutions of the faith in that country. This is what it means. This is the suffusion, the lower strata, the lower layers, the deeper layers and strata of society. So this is the way that he saw it. The seed is Adam. It comes all the manifestations of God until it gets to the Bab. The Bab is the fruit of this tree. It is crushed. The oil is used by Baha'u'llah. The light spreads. But this light is now spreading, has its own stages, until it reaches the point of the 10-year crusade when it explodes and reaches so many countries in the world. This diffusion of the light. And then as he looks into the future and speaks to the universal house of justice, if you like, in a way, he says, now, this light, first of all, has to be everywhere, not only for the chief dependencies, but all the dependencies, every spot on earth. Second, the entire machinery of the administrative order should be erected in each of these points, in these spots. Third, the heat, the warmth, the life-giving influence of the faith of God should touch the hearts and minds of all men, everywhere. That is the goal. That is the final objective. And that is, he calls the 10th part. And the House of Justice now is in control of the 10th part of this tremendous, this stupendous spiritual evolution of humanity. From Adam to the end of the Baha'i dispensation. A dispensation which, from some of the questions that I have received, I just want to make clear to you that, of course, the Golden Age is part of the dispensation of Baha'u'llah. A number of questions were asked. Is the Golden Age part of the dispensation of Baha'u'llah? Of course it is. We have the first is the heroic age, the formative age, the Golden Age. This is all part of the dispensation of Baha'u'llah, the 1,000 years. As you see in your notes, he calls one of the titles he gives to the formative age is the Iron Age. This iron becomes golden in the Golden Age. This is all part of the dispensation of Baha'u'llah. When will the Golden Age begin? We do not know. This is for the House of Justice to decide. They will announce it. All we have to do is to see what we have to do today, according to the wishes of the heart of the cause, which is beating every day through messages, through guidance that they are sending to us. So that is the Golden Age. But Baha'i civilization is different from the Golden Age. Baha'i civilization will not appear as soon as the Golden Age has begun. No. According to Shoghi Effendi, this Baha'i civilization is itself the result of the operation of the Golden Age, because, he says, The golden age will have its own epochs. The golden age will have its own crusades, its own plans, all under the guidance of the Universal House of Justice. And it will produce that civilization. And that civilization, he says, will continue to evolve with the appearance of future manifestations of God. They will come to consolidate the civilization which was born under the guidance, the influence of the dispensation of Baha'u'llah. They will improve on it. They will develop it. We will see more and more of the wondrous signs of this new civilization which is to be born. The honor, the great high station of this dispensation of Baha'u'llah is that for the first time it gave birth to this civilization. But this civilization, which is the result of the golden age, has to continue to evolve throughout the dispensations of the future, all of these new manifestations to come, as clearly stated by Abdul Baha and further confirmed by Shoghi Effendi, will be under the shadow of Baha'u'llah. This is going to be the Baha'i cycle. It's the cycle of Baha'u'llah. And these manifestations of God will come in order to improve upon, to develop further, to make greater advances in the progress, in the evolution of this divine civilization, which is going to be born and continue to exist till the end of the Baha'i cycle. Now, there are some terms here that are used. 5 more minutes, yes. I will quickly do this. In the last paragraph, in the last sentence, last column, you see 2 terms used: entry by troops, ? Mass conversion, ? Now, the question mark is your humble servant, because I don't know. Because nobody knows. The question marks means I am guessing. This is what it means. But I put it there to open my heart to you and tell you what is in my heart, what is on my mind. It may happen like this, it may not happen like this. But this is the way I understand it today, in the year 2005. Now, in 2006, I may change my mind. Now, this is based, there is a difference between entry by troops and mass conversion. In other words, we are going now through 3 stages. Our present stage is not entry by troops. The stage of entry by troops, which is ahead of us, then the stage of mass conversion, which is after entry by troops. There is a difference between these things. And therefore, I put them in this way. Now, there is a letter from Shoghi Effendi, which has been published, in which he gives us his definition of entry by troop stage and mass conversion stage. In our excitement, I remember in the days of the Hands of the Cause, in our excitement, when we had about, let us say, 50 Baha'is accepting the faith in a certain village, in India or in Africa or in Bolivia or wherever, we have mass conversion. That was, we used this term mass conversion very loosely, not realizing that this was not the correct term to use. It was not even entry by troops. It was just a group of Baha'is who had become Baha'is. And then in some cases, because we did not have the facilities that we exist today, namely the institutes and the study circles and all the other core activities, they came and we lost many of them, unfortunately. They came in and they left. And we cannot find them. Maybe one day they will come back and they are welcome. And of course, we will find them eventually, because many of them have different family problems, economical problems, and otherwise they have drifted away from the cause. And as we did not have these facilities to keep them inside the faith, deepen them, make them lovers instead of just followers, so that they become consecrated, dedicated, lovers of the cause, then gradually they drifted away. But now, with the system that the House of Justice has built, with these institutes, which is now part and parcel of the life of every national spiritual assembly throughout the world, just as they have a Haziratul Quds, now it is the duty of every national assembly to have its own teaching institute. And they collaborate with the counselors, they consult with the counselors. None of these things existed in those early years. So we bring them in. Now, the House of Justice has told us that all these plans that they are giving us are in order to advance the process of entry by troops. They are reminding us that we are every day approaching that day of entry by troops. We are almost at the threshold of entry by troops. But this time, organized entry by troops. This time, entry by troops who will come in, who will join these classes, will be deepened and will be kept within the cause, protected within the cause. This is what the hope is. We have to wait with abated breath, with great excitement, what the next plan of the House of Justice is going to be. In just a year from now, as we finish the 5-year plan. But while we are having this last year of the 5-year plan ahead of us, we have to do everything we can to be worthy for the new plan, because upon the success of this plan will depend the success of the new plan that is ahead of us. So that is entry by troops. Then Shoghi Effendi in that letter says, this entry by troops will be a prelude, an introduction to the stage of mass conversion, the spiritualization of the masses. There is a difference between troops and masses. The word entry by troops has been taken from one of the tablets of Baha'u'llah. It's okay? Just give me 3-4 minutes. In the tablet of Baha'u'llah to Nasruddin Shah, that you find in the new compilation, Summons of the Lord of Hosts. It's a new compilation that the House of Justice has released of the tablets of Baha'u'llah addressed to the kings of the earth and the rulers, and important tablets of Baha'u'llah also. All right. In this tablet, Baha'u'llah tells Nasruddin Shah, he says, I'm not quoting the exact words, but see how important it is that this poor head of 85-year-old, Violette does not like me to remind myself and to remind you that I am 85 years old. But never mind. But what a wonderful thing it would have been if this poor memory of mine could have retained the exact words of Baha'u'llah that I can quote for you. Then I knew how to memorize it in the original. I memorized the original when I was a Baha'i youth. But the English, it's a new translation. I have not memorized it. So I have to give you the meaning of it. So Baha'u'llah is telling Nasruddin Shah, very soon, God is going to open for His portal a new gate, and the portal will open. Now, this idea of the portal and the entry by troops in that portal, he uses the word entry by troops in that portal. You can think of a big gate. For example, those of you who have been to Acre, You have seen the big gate of Acre. Now, if you see, there is a small gate, a small for one person to enter. That big gate is closed, but that small gate, for control, for security, that's what they did, so that one at a time could enter to see who he is and what he is, why is he wants to enter the city. This was the system for the old city. These terms about the portals and the gates and so on. He says God is going to open. In other words, so far it's individual conversion. One at a time. If you like, two at a time. Three at a time. Very close to each other. They are coming in. This is the stage where we are. The small gate. The small door. Baha'u'llah is saying God is going to open the gate. And the troops will enter. This is what the House of Justice is planning to do for us. They want to open the gate. And this 5-year plan is a preparation for the opening of the gate so that the troops will enter. We have to be ready for the troops. And this, Shoghi Effendi now says, this is itself a prelude for the third stage. From the small gate to the portal, then there is no control. The masses will come. Third stage, mass conversion. How does he describe the last stage? We quoted for you this in the passage here, in these notes. It is when suddenly, he says, through ways that are mysterious, we don't know how this is going to happen. Suddenly, there will be a 1,000-fold increase in the spiritual power, the material and spiritual power, as well as the material resources of the Baha'i world community. How is this going to happen? It's impossible to imagine. We cannot imagine it. It's in His hand. It is His invisible hand. It will happen in an unexpected way. When Shoghi Effendi, writing to the Baha'is of Persia on the same theme, he said, it will be unexpected. Whatever we say here that I think is going to happen like that, it will not happen like that. Because it is unexpected. This is a miraculous, mysterious thing in the knowledge of God. What he is telling us, he says, you do stage 1. You do, under the guidance of the Universal House of Justice, stage 2, which is entry by troops. I will take care of stage 3. This is what Baha'u'llah is saying. This third stage is not in our hands. It is part of the major plan of God. It's no more a part of the minor plan. The major plan and the minor plan will merge together. And you have mass conversion. Finita la musica.